And now tonight I'm going to be preaching on verse number 2 of Romans 12. We just read Romans chapter number 12. I'm going to be preaching on verse number 2. It says, "And be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." Not being conformed to this world. That's what I'm preaching on, not being conformed to this world. Now, that means not being the same as the world. Like if the world is like this, then that's not what you're like. You're something different. Not going along with what the world thinks. You're probably familiar with the idea of groupthink, going along with the masses, In fact, the Bible talks about like not following a multitude to do evil. It's easy to follow. Everyone else does this, must be the right thing to do. Everyone else is going there, everyone else is saying this, it must be the right thing for us. And specifically, it says in this verse, we need to renew our minds. We need to renew our minds so that we know what the will of God is. And obviously, as if it need to be said, that God's will, it's good, it's acceptable, it's perfect. Okay, so we need to know what God's will is. Now, there's a lot of different areas where we need to be careful that we don't conform to this world. But tonight, we're only going to look at one specific example. One specific example. Now, on Monday, Doug sent me a link to an article from the ODT. Doug's my news hound, and he sent me this on Monday. And the title of this brief article is "Unvaccinated Ski Staff Kept Away." It says, unvaccinated staff at 2 Queenstown ski fields will be stopped from coming to work as health officials fight to stop the spread of measles through the resort's community. 8 new measles cases of measles in the area were confirmed at the weekend, taking the total number of those infected to 15. 6 of the new cases were New Zealand ski staff working at the remarkable ski field, and the remaining 2 were primary school-aged children. At least 11 New Zealand ski staff had now tested positive for the virus, which had spread into the wider Queenstown area in the past month. It has now spread to the Remarkables Primary School and the Queenstown Lakes District Emergency Department. That doesn't even make sense. I've got a typo on their thing. Never mind. So New Zealand Ski Chief Executive Paul Anderson said a decision had been made yesterday to stop any staff who remained unvaccinated against the disease from working at the Remarkables or Coronet Peak ski areas. So if you're not vaccinated, you can't go up there. If you're a worker. Any staff who exhibited symptoms would also be stood down from work immediately, Mr Anderson said. In the past week, more than 500 staff had been vaccinated or received booster shots, and the decision would affect a very small number, he said. A lot of our staff are from overseas. It can be very hard for them to find their medical records, so the best way to protect themselves and others from the virus was just to receive the vaccination. A small number who had not been working in the past week would be vaccinated this week. Mr Anderson said the public could be confident when visiting either of the 2 ski areas. A Southern District Health Board spokeswoman said there had been no additional confirmed cases yesterday. More test results are expected today. The Southern District Health Board has urged residents of the Queenstown area to check their immunisation records. Those who are unsure should assume they were unvaccinated and call their GP to find out the best time to be vaccinated. Extra vaccinations did not cause any harm. More than 1,000 cases have been confirmed in New Zealand this year, 881 of them in the Auckland region. So that was on Monday that Doug sent me that. But he didn't stop there. On Tuesday, he sent me another article. Measles precaution at school. Remarkables, primary school pupils and staff with possible measles symptoms and those who have not been vaccinated twice, so if you haven't been vaccinated twice, have been told to stay away until next Tuesday. The total number of confirmed measles cases in Queenstown remains 15. And the SDHB said it was aiming to contain the resort's town's outbreak and to stop it spreading to other areas. Just goes on some of the same sort of things. 2 Remarkables pupils were confirmed as having the virus last week. And then who was it? Susan Jack, the principal, says... the principal's Debbie Jackson. She says, Dr. Jack's letter, emailed to the school later on Sunday night, said any pupils and staff members who could not show proof of having received 2 measles vaccines could not return to the school until September 17th. So notice this. The Southern District Health Board is sending an email to the school saying if you've got any pupils who aren't vaccinated, they can't come to school. Not allowed to. Can't come to school. Mrs. Dixon said a number of pupils and staff were affected by the requirements, but she could not say how many. Due to confidentiality, I'm governed by the Southern District Health Board not to actually state that number. Okay? They're verifying the information that we're providing, and it's changing because people are getting checked, so at this time it's just too early to say. Staff spent most of yesterday checking the school's immunisation record, she said. So that's what they spent their day doing. Okay, so that's what they were doing on Monday. They were spending all their day checking everyone's record. It doesn't worry about reading and writing and that sort of stuff. Let's check your immunisation records. A drop-in vaccination clinic will operate in Queenstown today at Lakes District Hospital from 3:30 to 8 p.m. And if that wasn't enough, then later in the week I got another link from Doug, and this one was baby in Canterbury has measles. So things are just going from bad to worse. An infant in Canterbury has the measles. Health officials have confirmed. Now, I mean, this is the biggest of the articles. This is 3 pages. This one, a baby in Canterbury has the measles. Now, some of you might be thinking, yeah, I mean, this is news, because measles is it's a dangerous, deadly disease. In fact, we'll see this in the article, that measles is a deadly, dangerous disease. So it's important we know about this. But some of you that might be maybe older, maybe people that are my age, or Doug's my age, he'll probably remember a time when people had measles. Yes. When people had measles and people had mumps and people had chickenpox and people had all these things without necessarily being vaccinated. I remember days like that when it was normal. It was actually commonplace. Yep. But as, I suppose, time goes by, people forget what it used to be like. Okay? And it's not that people were dying. It's not that people were dropping dead of these things, you see. And we'll get as we get through in the sermon. But so this baby in Canterbury's got the measles. What does it say? Members of the public do not need to be concerned. Because it's thought the infant contracted the highly infectious disease while visiting Auckland, where there were 1,238 confirmed measles cases as of 11:45 on Friday. Members of the public don't need to be concerned, as the baby had not been taken to public places, so you're all safe. Those who are not vaccinated should avoid travelling to Auckland, Canterbury Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Alistair Humphrey said. If you're going through Auckland, if you're not vaccinated, don't go. It's important to make sure you're immunised 2 weeks before travelling. It takes up to 2 weeks for your immunity to develop. If you are unwell, phone the GP, etc., etc. Some people... meanwhile, a warning was issued for Jetstar customers who flew from Melbourne to Auckland on Monday after it was confirmed a passenger had measles. So someone on the plane had measles. They were not aware they were infected when they boarded the flight, and it lists the flight number, etc., etc., and then it warns about the symptoms. Symptoms include a high fever, runny nose, cough, sore, red eyes, said Dr. Julia Peters. A few days later, a rash starts on the face and neck, then it spreads to the rest of the body. It can take 7 to 14 days to start experiencing symptoms, and you're at most risk if you're not immune to measles, either because you haven't been vaccinated or you haven't had the disease previously. Those who are on the flight and unsure whether they're immune should talk to the doctor on Healthline, etc. And it's just got a thing at the end. What is measles? So according to this, measles is a viral illness that causes skin rash and fever. It is very contagious. What are the symptoms of measles? It's already said that, what they are. Cough, runny nose, conjunctivitis, inflammation in the eyes. It may be possible to see small white spots inside the mouth. How long will it be before I know if I've caught the measles? 10 to 14 days. For someone who's caught the measles to show symptoms. If you've been near someone with measles and don't know if you're immune, seek medical advice immediately and remain in quarantine. When was the last outbreak of measles in New Zealand? The last 2 major measles epidemics in New Zealand occurred in the 1990s, with thousands of cases, hundreds of hospitalisations, and 7 deaths. Okay, so we need to realise, it's clear, thousands of cases, hundreds of people are in hospital, and there's been 7 deaths. Sounds pretty serious. Smaller outbreaks continue to occur, started when someone brings the disease back from an overseas trip. And that's the end of that. So Doug's kept me up to date with what's going on. Now, Doug's not preaching tonight, but you can hold him responsible for the sermon. It's his fault. Okay? Now, the title of the sermon tonight is Vaccination Lies. Vaccination Lies. Now, just to be clear, as we start off here, I don't think that parents who vaccinate their children are bad people at all. Okay? Now, the opposite is not true. There are a lot of people who think because I don't vaccinate my children that I am a bad person. You've probably come across this. If someone's against vaccination, they're a bad person. They should be locked up. They should have their children taken off them. Have you come across that sort of thing? I should have written it. I should have got some information about what's that crazy doctor up north? There's a guy up in Northland.
Oh, yes.
What's his name?
Oh.
And he's
I
mean, in some aspects, he's like he works. He does free clinics and stuff. And yeah. I'm sure the guy's heart's in the right place. Yeah. But the thing is, he really could do with reading some history. This guy, he could do with actually. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe he's like. We'll get into that in a minute as well. So we're saying, I don't think people who vaccinate their children are bad people, and the reason is, because many people they're just in the dark regarding vaccines. They just don't know. They don't know. I didn't know anything about vaccines. It wasn't until later in my life that I discovered some things. But just so you understand, you don't have to think the same thing as me about vaccines. You know, it says in 2 Corinthians 3:17, now the Lord is that Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. So preach the word, Baptist Church. We're not a church where everyone has to think the same thing. That's not what we're about. You can think differently. I like it if people think differently. Guess what? Because I'm not right about everything. Okay, so if you'll conform to what I think, the Bible doesn't say, don't be conformed to this world, but conform to what the pastor thinks. No, we need to conform to what God's word says. So understand, you've got freedom to think what you want. But please, my encouragement, especially if you're going into the medical profession, there's only one person who's doing it, but do your own research. Do your own research. This is very important. Now, here's the thing. The Bible talks a lot, not about vaccines, but the Bible talks a lot about something called cleanliness. It talks about cleanliness. It says in Leviticus chapter number 10 and verse number 8, Leviticus chapter number 10 and verse number 8, Leviticus 10:8 says, and the Lord spake unto Aaron, saying, remember, of course, Aaron was the high, he was the priest. He says to him, do not drink wine, nor strong drink, thou nor thy sons with thee, when ye go into the tabernacle of the congregation, lest ye die. That's good advice. Don't drink alcohol. He's saying, don't you drink when you come to church, lest you die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, and that ye may put difference between holy and unholy, and between unclean and clean. So the Bible says you need to know the difference. That's why you're not drinking, so you can tell what's the difference between something that's unholy or holy, something that's unclean and something that's clean. Leviticus chapter 11 verse 24 says, and these, it's talking about these different animals, and for these shall ye be unclean. Whosoever toucheth the carcass, that's like a dead body, of them shall be unclean unto the even. And whosoever beareth aught of the carcass of them shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the even. The carcass of every beast which divideth the hoof, and is not cloven-footed, nor cheweth the cud, are unclean unto you. Everyone that toucheth them shall be unclean. And whatsoever goeth upon his paws among all manner of beasts that go on all four, those are unclean unto you. Whoso toucheth their carcass shall be unclean until the even. And he that beareth the carcass of them shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the even. They are unclean unto you. So notice, you've got to wash your clothes. These things, these dead animals. Verse number 35 says, and everything whereupon any part of their carcass falleth shall be unclean. Whether it be oven or ranges for pots, they shall be broken down, for they are unclean and shall be unclean unto you. Nevertheless, a fountain or pit wherein there is plenty of water shall be clean, but that which toucheth their carcass shall be unclean. So if you've got some massive big water, then it's not that the whole thing, but anywhere near them, you're not going to drink where there's this dead animal. And if any part of their carcass fall upon any sowing seed which is to be sown, it shall be clean. But if any water be put upon the seed, and any part of their carcass fall thereon, it shall be unclean unto you. And if any beast of which ye may eat die, he that toucheth the carcass thereof shall be unclean until the even. And he that eateth the carcass of it shall wash his clothes, and be unclean until the even. He also that beareth the carcass of it shall wash his clothes, and be unclean until the even. You see, there's a biblical principle we need to understand. The biblical principle, and we'll get into this in a minute, of quarantine. Quarantine. We won't get into it. There's various chapters they talk about the skin diseases. People would have leprosy and other sort of skin diseases. And what do they have to be? They had to be examined. That means someone had to examine them. The priest would examine them and look upon them and say, well, what exactly are the symptoms? What have they got here? They'd be examined. They'd also be set apart for a time. They had to be set apart, separate from other people. That's quarantined. They had to dwell outside the camp. Their clothes, if they had this thing, their clothes had to be burned. Burn their clothes, had to give them clean new clothes. Their house had to be cleansed. And it talked about, if there was mould and stuff in it, they'd remove the bricks, and if the mould came back, they'd destroy the whole house. Okay? They had to wash in running water. So there was all these things that we see in the Bible. The Bible talks a lot about cleanness. Now, the subject of cleanliness is very relevant when it comes to vaccines for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because vaccines are dirty. Vaccines are dirty. Vaccination involves injecting a foreign substance into the body. It's specifically some form of disease substance. It might be, sometimes it's a live virus, sometimes it's not. There's various other things that are in there, various other chemicals. What they call adjuvants, I think they call them. And which basically an adjuvant, I looked it up in the dictionary, what did I see? It said what an adjuvant is. It's a substance which enhances the body's immune response to an antigen. So basically the idea is you put a little bit of the substance in. You've injected them with whatever sort of disease it is. It might be a sort of a dead version of it. But just putting that in, for a lot of people, it's not enough to stir up the immune system. And so what they do is they put this adjuvant in, and so that's basically going to wake the immune system up, and it's going to react to whatever's there. Okay? And that's a theory, and it's true, it actually does work. Okay? But of course, they've got the adjuvants, and they've got the other things, they're not actually attached to each other. So one of the things that happens, an unintended consequence that happens, is when you've got these adjuvants, these various sorts of metals and stuff that are in there, if that stirs up your immune system, and the disease particle that's been put in is not there, there might be something else around. Like maybe a food that you've eaten. What can happen then? Well, your immune system's like, hey, this thing's bad. And suddenly you can develop an allergy to some sort of food which you never had before. Why is it that so many people today are allergic to things like nuts and stuff like that? Why is that? One of the reasons is because people have been stirring up their immune systems. Okay? I mean, when I was a kid, it was rare to have someone that was allergic to things. It was a rare, whereas now, I don't think you'd go into a classroom where there wouldn't be someone that wouldn't be allergic. In fact, there'd be lots of people. Okay? So here's the thing. Putting these disease substances and these other chemicals into your bloodstream, that's not the cleanest thing. But also, the history of vaccines. The history of vaccines is actually very much associated with uncleanness. Let me just read you a little bit here. This is an 1861 article on US cities and parks in the Atlantic Monthly. This described the situation of what cities were like back then. This is 1861. It says, narrow and crooked streets, want of proper sewage and ventilation, the absence of forethought in providing open spaces for the recreation of the people, the allowance of intramural, that means like within the walls of a building, burials, like burying people inside a building, and of fetid nuisances, such as slaughterhouses and manufactories of offensive stuffs, have converted cities into pestilential enclosures and kept Jefferson saying, great cities are great sores, true in the most literal and mortifying sense. He's describing, these are what cities are like. You see what they had large numbers of families, they dwelled together in poorly constructed houses. There was no running water, there's no toilet, an entire street would share an outdoor pump and a couple of outside privy vaults or outhouses. That's what like when my mum grew up, that's what like, she didn't have a toilet, She had to go out and down and a whole bunch of people that used it. Large numbers of families dwelled. In 1934, Professor Arthur Cole described how some inhabitants of New York and Boston in the 1850s lived in dark cellars overrun with vermin. He says, while the larger cities possessed handsome residential districts in which the streets were paved, they were kept clean, the sewage was properly cared for, there was also crowded foreign quarters, veritable hives of humanity lacking ordinary comforts and often even necessities. New York in 1850 had 8,141 cellars, sheltering over 18,000 people. Over 18,000 people are living in cellars. There, as in Boston, about a 20th of the population lived in damp, dark, ill-ventilated, vermin-infested underground rooms. By the end of the war, that's the US Civil War, 15,000 tenement houses had been built in New York. Many of them hardly more than fever nests. You might have heard of tenement houses. This is a poor accommodation that people are living in. And a fever nest, why? Because the people that are there, they're sick. They're filled with all sorts of disease. It says the working classes inhabited the most deplorable housing, which was described by Friedrich Engels in 1844. Engels visited the slums while in Manchester, England, and noted the horrors he observed. He described the people he encountered in London and other towns in England. These pale, lank, narrow-chested, hollow-eyed ghosts whom one passes every step, these languid, flabby faces, incapable of the slightest energetic expression I've seen in such startling numbers. You look around at these people, it's like the Walking Dead. They're not when you see someone and they're healthy and they're vibrant and they're well, and other times you think, oh, that person's on death's door. Well, that's what he's describing these people are like. Hordes of people crowded beneath smouldering, water-rotted roofs or burrowing among the rats of clammy cellars. Roy Porter, a British historian noted for his work on the history of medicine, wrote about the plight of millions of people in the newly industrialised cities. He says, for millions, entire lives, because the thing is, the population increased massively. Like London, I think, was the biggest city in the world, and in about 1800, there was 800,000 people in London. But by the year 1900, there was 7 million. Went from 800,000 to 7 million within the space of 100 years. That's a huge increase. And do you think the infrastructure increased to be able to handle that? No. It says, for their entire lives, albeit very short ones, for millions of people, were passed in new industrial cities of dreadful night with an all too typical socio-pathology. foul housing, often in flooded cellars, gross overcrowding, atmospheric and water supply pollution, overflowing cesspools, contaminated pumps, poverty, hunger, fatigue, and abjection everywhere. Such conditions, comparable to today's third world shantytown or refugee camps, bred rampant sickness of every kind. Because it's interesting, you see, one of the big arguments that we're going to get into is this whole idea that vaccines have saved us. Vaccines have saved us from all these diseases. And that's why we need them. Because did you know that there are still a lot of people die from me? I looked it up, I can't remember what it was. But I'm thinking that like the tens of thousands of people who died from measles, like this year. Tens of thousands of people died from measles. Okay? Now in New Zealand, we saw in that thing, within, there's been, maybe one a year or something like that. It might be, when they have a bit of an outbreak, that's what it averages. But how come there's tens of thousands of people? They're not dying in New Zealand. They're not dying in America. They're not dying in westernised, Western world. Where are they dying? They're dying where people are living in abject poverty. That's where they're dying. They're dying where people are living in abject poverty. Now, the interesting thing is, in these places, do you know what they have over in these places? They've got vaccination like we've got over here. Did you know that? Because a lot of really wealthy people like Bill Gates and all sorts of people that are really into funding vaccinations. So you go over in Africa and these people, they're getting their vaccinations, but they're still dying of measles. I wonder why that is. Maybe because they're living in conditions which we're describing, which occurred 150 years ago in, the Western world. He says that this was comparable to shantytown refugee camps. They bred sickness of every kind, appalling neonatal, infant and child mortality, accompanied the abomination of child labour in mines and factories. Life expectations were exceedingly low, often under 20 years among the working classes, and everywhere sickness precipitated family breakdown, pauperisation and social crisis. Contemporary writers of the time tried to call attention to the plight of the wretched poor and their terrible living conditions. Andrew Mearns and William C. Preston wrote about the poor in their 1883 book, The Bitter Cry of Outcast London, an inquiry into the condition of the abject poor. So there were people that were concerned about this back then. Because it's not that everyone was living like this. There were wealthy people and they were fine. They had their running water. They had sewage. They weren't living in squalor like this. But some of them, decent people actually thought, this is not right that people have to live like this. And he said, look, few who will read these pages have any conception of what these pestilential human rookeries are, where tens of thousands are crowded together amidst horrors which call to mind what we've heard of the middle passage of the slave ship. It's like where these people are living, it's like someone in a slave ship, just filth and disease-ridden. Well, isn't that what you hear about those things with the slave ship? Didn't half of them die when they're travelling across the ocean? To get to them, you would have to penetrate courts reeking with poisonous gases arising from accumulation of sewage and refuse scattered in all directions and often flowing beneath your feet. Courts, many of them which the sun never penetrates, which are never visited by a breath of fresh air, and which rarely know the virtues of a drop of cleansing water. You have to ascend rotten staircases, which threaten to give way beneath every step, leaving gaps that imperil the limbs and lives of the unwary. You have to grope your way along dark and filthy passages, swarming with vermin. Then, if you're not driven back by the intolerable stench, you may gain admittance to the dens in which these thousands of beings who belong, as much as you, to the race for whom Christ died, herd together. So he's describing, and it's not describing like some of it sounds like when you have someone around the varsity, you come across little places, a little bit like this, but it's not this bad. Well, having said that, the squalor and the filth and the squalor that many students live in, is it a surprise they have increased incidence of a lot of diseases? It's not a surprise. The nutrition and the filth they live in. He says, look, the extremely stressful conditions rapidly aged the poor people, the poor working class people. Those who escaped death from disease or disability at an early age often lived only into their 30s or 40s. Among the labouring classes, life expectation remained everywhere low, little more than 30 years. And from the 1830s photographs show working people looking old by their 30s and 40s as poor nutrition, illness, bad living conditions and gross overwork took their toll. Because here's the thing, there's a whole pile, and I won't sort of get into this, added to all these conditions, they were working. You heard about child labour? Have you heard, what's that one, like where people had to be chimney sweeps and stuff? There's some of those books. I come to think, well, Charles Dickens and people like that. I've written about, the life of the working class. People worked, when they're, 7, 8, 9 years old, working. Boys, girls, I mean, did you know that women are right into working these days, aren't they? Even though the Bible says it's better for a woman to be a keeper at home. But back in the 1800s, there was a lot of women working. Did you know that?
Yes.
There's a lot of women working. Because they're poor.
Yes.
The women were working, the men were working, the children were working, because they were all dead poor.
Yeah.
So, who's around to keep a clean house?
Yeah.
Who's around to cook and provide nutritious meals? And obviously, money is a problem, and obtaining these things is a problem. But that's a whole other thing that's to be added in there. All of these conditions, when someone's, how healthy do you think my kids would be if they had garbage to eat, they lived in filth and squalor, and had to work 16 hours a day down a mine? Do you think they'd be in good health?
No.
Would you think they might be on death's door?
Yeah.
They could, because that's why so many people, they died at a very young age. Clean water, proper sewage treatment, and fresh air did not exist in these areas. Without any sanitary infrastructure, human and animal waste would flow into the streets, ending up in the local streams and rivers. So the sewage is going into the streams and rivers, which happened to also be the people's primary water supply. So that's the water you get to wash. Not that washing was a big thing.
Yes, that's right.
I think some of my grandparents or, in-laws might have lived in these conditions where, washing once a week, that was plenty. That's all they wanted to wash. Okay? Sanitary facilities designed for smaller populations failed. Cesspools overflowed and seeped into local water supplies. Now, why would I bother reading that to you? I suppose, for one thing, it's just to give you a bit of a picture of what it was like. Because, to be honest, until I read some of these things, I sort of knew, things weren't great back then. But when you actually read it, because these are accounts of people that were around back then, and they were writing, this is what it's actually like. You see, when I decided not to vaccinate my children, it wasn't really for any strong biblical reason. And I'm going to get into some biblical reasons in a minute. But it wasn't for any strong biblical reason. Because, back then, I didn't really know the Bible that well. What was the major reason why I decided, no, we're not going to vaccinate my children anymore? Because we'd followed along the guidelines. And I had misgivings, when this kid, and you're thinking, he was fine, and now he's got a sore leg. And he's got a temperature. And it's like, have I really done the right thing by taking him? You sort of, I wondered.
Yes.
But what I did is I did some research. And when I was reading and researching things, I came across a website, which is still around today, a website called childhealthsafety.wordpress.com. And it had a page on it called Vaccines Did Not Save Us. 2 centuries of official statistics. Now this website, it's just some blog that someone had put up there, and it's just, and anyone can write anything. But it was interesting. It was very long. It was a very long blog post, and there was a lot of graphs and stuff, and then there was comments. And there was a lot of comments by a lot of people. There was a lot of people that were pro-vaccination, and there were a lot of people that were anti-vaccination. Obviously this was an anti-vaccination website, saying vaccines didn't save us. But I read the whole thing, and then I read all these comments. What does this person say? What does this person say? What does this person... And so I read it. And I thought, well, that's interesting. That's interesting. I wonder who's telling the truth. I wonder who's telling the truth. So there's only one way to find out. And what I did is I basically looked up lots of information about the claims that were made. I looked up the mortality rates for different diseases. The mortality rates to see how many people were dying from these different diseases and when was it. And I looked it up. I looked on New Zealand government websites. I looked on Australian government websites. I looked on health, websites. And what I found, and the reason I looked this up, because of course, isn't the big argument about vaccines, is that they save millions of lives. Isn't that the argument? Vaccines save millions of lives. Well, you can look at the statistics from many different countries, for measles, for mumps, for rubella, for whooping cough, for diphtheria, typhoid fever, tuberculosis, influenza, scurvy, scarlet fever, all these different ones. Now, some of you might think, hang on, some of these things don't have vaccines. That's true. You can look at these various diseases which claimed a lot of lives, and I should have put the whiteboard up here, but just picture if you would. They all pretty much show the same thing. They show the death rate. high death rate. Think of this big spiky line, and then over time, up and down, because you have that big, whatever you call it, comes through, epidemic, up and down, but it's high. Lots of people are dying. And then over time, it drops down until it's like this little wee squiggly worm at the bottom. That's what they all pretty much show. And then, when you overlay on top of one of those graphs, when the vaccine was invented, and then when a vaccine was widely used. Because it's going to be invented, but if no one's taking it, it can't be responsible for dropping the death rate. It can't. It's not possible. And what you find with these, with the huge majority of them, you find that you've got this big squiggly line which comes down low, and then after it's come down low, vaccines invented, and then even further, more people are actually taking it. That's what it is. That's what it is for measles. That's what it is. Because there were lots of people who died of measles. That's what it is. Now, some of them you'll find the same thing, but you know what you'll find? There's no vaccine being invented. And so no one's taking a vaccine because some of those diseases I mentioned don't have vaccines. And they just drop down to practically nothing, all by themselves. And the very fact that they exist, you think, well, if that dropped by itself, But then the fact that this one dropped, before the vaccine came in. Vaccines aren't magic. They can't go back and heal people hundreds of years before they were invented. They can't do those things. They're not time travel devices. And all over the world you see the same thing. The New Zealand statistics, Australia, the UK, the US, all over the place, you find the same thing. You'll find figures online from government websites of all sorts of countries, and it tells the same story. So here's a question. Why do so many people believe that vaccines are the greatest contribution to medicine in modern society? Isn't it? It's held up. This is vaccines. Because why do they believe that? Because that's what they've been told. They've been told it. Pharmaceutical companies are some of the most corrupt organisations in the world. They make billions of dollars selling snake oil to an unsuspecting public. That's what they do. Now, more and more people are starting to wake up. More and more people are starting to wake up. In fact, I was just reading this. There's a Gallup poll, and it says, Big Pharma sinks to the bottom of US industry rankings. It says the pharmaceutical industry is now the most poorly, and this was only September 2019, pharmaceutical industry is now the most poorly regarded industry in Americans' eyes, ranking last on a list of 25 industries that Gallup tests annually. Americans are more than twice as likely to rate the pharmaceutical industry negatively, 58%, as positively, 27%, giving it a net positive score of minus 31. So it's the bottom. It's below everything. I mean, do you know who's just above pharmaceutical industry? The government. The government. So it's lower than the government. And you know, no offence intended, just above that is healthcare industry. So it's interesting. Above that is advertising. Above that is oil and gas industry. Above that is the legal lawyers are above that. Above that is TV and radio. Those are all rated higher. We're still all fairly down the bottom, but there we go. So maybe some people are starting to wake up that these people are crooks. Now you might say, look, this is all very interesting, but you've just been raving on and telling me what you think. You've been giving me some stuff about what these people think. But I came to church to hear the Bible preached. Yeah. I came to hear the Bible preached. Good. Turn to Mark chapter number 5. Turn to Mark chapter number 5. You see, because the Bible's got the answers for all of our questions. Mark chapter number 5. Mark chapter number 5. And verse number 25. Mark chapter 5, verse 25. Page 1004. Mark chapter 5, verse 25. It says, and a certain woman which had an issue of blood 12 years, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse, when she had heard of Jesus, came in the press behind, and touched his garment. For she said, if I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. Now that's just Jesus healing someone. We read that, don't we? Jesus healed someone. But here's the thing. Did you notice what it said at the start? This woman, she had this issue of blood for 12 years, and she had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse. This woman who's sick, she's been to lots of doctors. She's suffered things from them, and she's got worse. And it's cost her money. She'd spent all that she had. They'd fleeced her. You know, Jesus said in Matthew 9:12, Jesus said, they that be whole need not a physician, but they that are sick. If you want to take one verse away from the sermon tonight, remember this one. They that be whole need not a physician, but they that are sick. If you're not sick, you don't need a physician. You don't. So, because who do they give vaccines to? They give a vaccination to someone who's not sick to prevent them getting sick. Isn't that what they do? And just in passing, I mean, Jordan's not here tonight, but he, sometimes make a bit of money. What does he do? Does drug trials. Doesn't he? He does drug trials. Yes. Now, here's the thing. How would you describe Jordan? He's young, fit, healthy. He's in pretty good shape. So they test them on him. Now, how many people do you think are in there in those drug trials who are sick? Yeah. What about people who are really young, really old, really infirm? Are they testing them on those people? Or are they just testing on the students that are, wanting to make a bit of coin? Exactly. But when they do a lot of these trials, I mean, there's obviously different ones. A lot of them are quite short. They're quite short. They test them. Has anything happened, within a few days? Good to go. Also, when they do longer trials, do you know what they have? They have a thing called a washout period. Do you know what a washout period is? You give the stuff to people, and then the people that don't respond too well to it, do you know what they do? They withdraw them from the trial. Yeah. Because, we don't want to make someone unwell, do we? So anyone who's, they're not responding well, so we'll remove them out of it. Then we'll continue our study, and then we can say this percentage of people had this response. But the people that actually might have been affected badly, but they're actually gone. They removed them in the washout period. Yeah. It doesn't sound legit. No. It sounds like if you're going to go and get your, it's like when they claim that the Earth's really old, and they do these tests, and they, I've got this rock, I want you to test it and date it for me. You have to put in the form how old you think it is. Why shouldn't need to? They should be able to figure that all out. No, you tell them what sort of age you're looking for. You tell them what sort of age you're looking for. It's a rigged test. It says in Job 13 verse 4, Job said, but ye are all forgers of lies, ye are all physicians of no value. Physicians of no value. Now just so you think, I'm not getting on your case. I'm not against doctors, okay? I'm not against doctors. Luke was called the beloved physician. He was the beloved physician. So, hey, you can have good doctors and bad doctors. And I'll be honest, I think most doctors are actually good. Most doctors, their heart's in the right place. They've gone into the field, not to make lots of money, they've gone because they actually care about people. That's what I believe. Now, there are some who are bad, but the majority are actually good. But we do need to realise that doctors aren't God. They're not. Doctors don't know everything. A lot of people think, if a doctor says it, it must be true. The doctor says it. Look, I know people who are doctors. There's a girl from my class at school that's a doctor. And I remember at school, she wasn't very bright. She was stupid. She was a bimbo. Yeah. And so she was. Yeah. She wasn't bright. But later in life, she obviously eventually grew up and went and got a work ethic and then worked hard. And now she's a doctor. Yeah. But really, actually, no. I know another guy who's a doctor. He was bright, and he worked really hard. Okay, I think he's a better doctor than she is, but anyway, he's my mate. But here's the thing, we need to know, doctors, they don't know everything. And to a large degree, the thing is, doctors, they've been fooled. They've been fooled. Not only have they been fooled, they've been bribed. They've been bribed. My mate who's a doctor, I regularly see pictures where he's off, and he's off in Hawaii, and he's off in these different places. What's he on? He's on some conference. And who's paying for it? He's not paying for it. Pharmaceutical companies. That's who pays for it. They pay for it. And the thing is, it's just the same way that the public have been taken in by the media. You see, the public listen to the media and they hear. If you, every day, it was Monday, there was a report, Tuesday, I'm not sure you could have found one every day of the week. Every day of the week. The measles. It's like, we need to be terrified. And if people hear enough, they believe it. They believe it because it's on the news. It must be true. But we need to realise that they only tell you part of the story. Do you remember the Disneyland? There was the Disneyland measles outbreak. Yes. And interesting thing was, in that Disneyland measles outbreak, 31% of the people who got the measles were vaccinated. 31. So 1/3 of the people who got the measles, they're vaccinated. But I thought the vaccinations are supposed to protect you. Well, no, 31% of them were vaccinated. How about this? 38% had the vaccine strain of measles. Do you know what that means? They didn't have wild measles, they had the vaccine strain. They tested it. It's the strain that was in the vaccine, which means they got the measles from the vaccine. They got it from the vaccine. Either they got it directly from the vaccine, or they got it from someone else who was vaccinated and who passed it on to them. Because, the thing is, people don't really... We like to think we know lots. Humans, what do we call ourselves? Homo sapiens. Or Homo sapien sapien. What does that mean? That means wise man. It's like, you really think we're that wise? No, the Bible says, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. It's like we think we're really smart, but we really don't know much. The whole point of a vaccination, what does it do? It's supposed to produce like an antibody. But did you know there are people who've got genetic mutations who can't produce antibodies? Did you know that? There are people who cannot produce antibodies. But some of those people who can't produce antibodies, they can get something like the measles or the mumps, or they can get some sort of disease, and after they've had it, after they've recovered, do you know what they are? They're immune. But they can't produce antibodies. How does that work? Because there's more mechanisms than we necessarily understand. There are other mechanisms, which vaccines don't have anything to do with. The other thing, back in that Disneyland thing, half of the people were adults. Half of the people were adults. Because isn't that the big thing? You've got to because it's all about you've got to vaccinate your children. You've got to vaccinate your children. It's a big push to get children. But we need to realise that the big push to get children vaccinated is only the start. It's only the start. The end game is everyone. Pharmaceutical companies want every single person on this planet to be vaccinated every single year. Probably multiple times a year they'd like. They just keep on stepping it up. Turn to Revelation chapter number 13. Revelation chapter number 13. Revelation chapter number 13. Let me just talk about a couple of quick things. One of them is, because when you say you're not into vaccinating, people, they call you anti-vax. Maybe I should call myself pro-choice. I think so. Pro-choice. My body, my choice. Doesn't it sound like a good idea? Well, here's the thing. Two of the big things I'll talk about polio and I'll talk about smallpox. They're the two big ones. You've got to be pro-vax. Sure, maybe measles is not that serious. If you've got a reasonable diet, if you're not living in squalor, if you're not in a third world country, then measles is not a big deal. But smallpox and polio. And of course the thing is people need to realise that when these things were these amazing scourges, what were the conditions of those countries like? What were they like? Now, true, polio was later, when conditions were much better. But do you know what they were doing at the time? At the time, when there was the big polio outbreaks in the United States, you ever heard of a thing called DDT? Yep. DDT, it's a pesticide. Yep. Okay? And DDT actually has some of the same, what would you call it? The same symptoms that you get from polio. Polio is poliomyelitis. It's a thing that infects the anterior horn of the spinal disease is what it is. And so you can get various forms of, you can be paralysed. Now, even with that, 95% of people who get polio, it's asymptomatic. Do you know what that means? There's no symptoms. That means you've got polio and nobody knows it. Did you know that? Asymptomatic. 2% you'd have a stiff neck. 2% you might have other sort of minor symptoms. Less than 1% will suffer paralysis. And of those 1%, or less than 1%, 5 to 10% of those would have long-term paralysis. So it's a very small minority who actually get the paralysis. And it's only a minority of those who actually that it's actually long-term. Most of it lasts for a while. And then it's gone. Okay? But here's the thing. With that whole asymptomatic, that means that you can have a disease and you can pass it on and you're not showing any symptoms. Well, guess what? You could get one of these vaccinations, like the measles, and you could be asymptomatic, and you can pass it on to someone else. Okay, I think they call it vaccine shedding, is what it's called. You know, some of them they might even, you know, they've got a subclinical infection. You know, they're sick. Because here's the thing, if you've got something where people can see it, it's like, I'm feeling a bit sick, so you stay away. You know, people have got little kids, stay away, don't infect them, don't go and visit your elderly parents or whatever. You know, don't want to pass it on. But if you've got something that's subclinical, no one knows. Yeah, I'll come and cuddle the kids after having my vaccination. But here's the thing, with smallpox, this is the one that I've done the most reading about. It was this guy, Dr. Edward Jenner, was the guy that's the saviour, who saved us from smallpox. This guy, Edward Jenner, he performed his first vaccination on James Phipps, a boy who was 8 years old. I think he was like his gardener's kid. He also vaccinated his own son. They actually died. One of them died when he was 20 and one died when he was 21 of something called consumption, which I think is the old word they'd called for tuberculosis. But of course, tuberculosis is associated with smallpox. Okay? And with a lot of these things, you see, they change the names of lots of things too. That's one of the whole reasons for the big polio dropping down. They change the definition of polio. They change it to say, in order to say someone's got polio, you've got to have this paralysis for this certain length of time. Whereas back when it was in its heyday, it was like, we test you, if you show paralysis, you've got polio. But there's a lot of things that can cause paralysis, not just polio. But they change the definitions, and all of a sudden, wow, look what the vaccination's done. It's reduced it right down because they've changed the definition. So, he introduced this stuff. And you can read the history about it. You can read the history of people in his time, doctors writing and saying, look, because his theory was that, he had this theory that milkmaids, people that were milking cows, they would be quite likely to get cowpox, he thought. And he thought by them catching cowpox and recovering from that, that would protect them so they wouldn't get smallpox. That was the theory. But the problem was there were plenty of people that were telling him, but guess what? People can have cowpox and they can still get smallpox. Okay? But because he did it, what he did was, on this boy, Phipps, he gave him cowpox and he recovered, and then later on he gave him smallpox and didn't get it. That was a trial of one. Okay, it's not a sort of a big scientific study, it was a trial of one. But here's the thing. You could do the same thing on someone who hadn't had cowpox, and you could, expose them to the virus, and they might not get it. Or maybe they did get it, but maybe they got it and it was subclinical. You couldn't see that it was asymptomatic. You couldn't tell. Did he have any way of knowing? No, because this is in what it was, 1796. I mean, they didn't know anything about germs and bacteria and all that sort of stuff. I mean, what they should have known, if they'd read the Bible says the life of the flesh is in the blood. They might have thought it would be a bad idea to be going, messing about with your blood. Because that's what they used to pass it, arm to arm. They'd get the pus from this person, make a cut on you and put their pus in. That's what they do. That's how it was done. Now, I know some squash players into eating pus, but that's a different thing. It's a very different thing, consuming something in your mouth versus putting something into your blood. Those are very, very different things. But here's the thing, and this is something I was blown away by this. Because looking at what's going on, it looks like they're heading down the road of forced vaccinations. And I thought, no, surely not. I don't know if any of you have seen. I mean, depends where you read. If you've been looking on the news, you won't have seen it. Yeah. But who's seen all the protests over in Sacramento? Seen the protests in Sacramento? Has anyone seen it? Has anyone watched the news? Anyone watched the news or read a newspaper or looked on Google News? Okay. Well, if you look on there, you won't actually see it. But in Sacramento, over in California, they've introduced a new law. They've already brought in laws to say, that you can't get, you can only get a medical exemption to be not vaccinated. Yeah. They've already said, if you want to come to school, you must be vaccinated. They've brought these laws in already, but now they're trying to tighten it up. Because some people are saying, well, some of these doctors are just giving anyone a medical exemption for no real reason. They're doing it for money. Okay, which is interesting because, of course, doctors who have a high vaccination rate of their patients, they get paid lots of money. There are huge kickbacks that they get. The more, if you've got a high percentage of people being vaccinated, you get money for that. Yeah. You get paid a lot of money for that. And but so they brought in they were bringing in this new bill. And what do? It's supposed to have normal procedure, 3 days. It's supposed to be read and people can make submissions and all that sort of stuff. Did it in 1 day. They did it in 1 day. And so there's all these protests. There's thousands of people out there protesting. They tied themselves to the building. They stormed into the place where it was going on. People, rioting in the streets. People arrested. Why wasn't it on the news? Wasn't on 1 News. Wasn't on 3 News. Wasn't on any mainstream media. Why? Because they don't want you to know about it. But that's the direction they're heading. They're heading where it's going to be forced vaccinations around the world. Now here's the thing. This is what shocked me when I looked into it and read the history. It's happened before. This is not some new thing that's going to happen. The reason I got you to turn to Revelation chapter 13 is because Revelation chapter 13 talks about the end times, talks about when there's going to be a one world government. And it talks about, I'll look at verse number 12, 11. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon, and he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth, and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed, and he doeth great wonders. So he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth, by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth, that they should make an image to the beast which had the wound by a sword and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. And that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, his number is 666. He's saying, look, he's going to cause it so that no one can buy and sell unless they've got the mark. Unless you've got this mark, you can't buy and sell. You can't be a part of society. You can't buy, you can't sell. You're excluded. Did you know that there are countries in the world today, Argentina. In Argentina, it is compulsory to be vaccinated. Not just for children, but for adults as well. You can't get a marriage license. You can't get a driver's license in Argentina unless you're vaccinated. It's coming already. It's coming already. It's not that far away. But here's the thing, I didn't realise, this has actually happened already. They already had laws. Like, back when there was the big smallpox thing, they brought laws in and they forced people to get vaccinated. See, smallpox is not one of these ones where it's all these big things and then the vaccine was coming. And that is an exception where they brought the vaccination was in early in the piece. But it wasn't the case if it was high, they brought in the vaccination and then it brought it down. It was way back early, they had vaccination and it was like getting higher. And there were people who were protesting. People who had, children, because I mean, how good do you think it was back then? Let's just swap a bit of pus. How many other diseases do you think you'd pick up? People whose family members died. It's like, no, you've already killed one of my children. You've already made this one sick. Don't take any more of them. Okay, you've got to pay a fine. You're off to prison. That's what they did. They did it in England. They did it in, they did it in Japan. They did it in the US. They did it all over the place. I was reading and really this history should be taught in schools. People should know about these things. And then maybe wouldn't be just so blindly fall into it. In 1885, the government of Leicester, over in England, the local government of Leicester said, no, we're not going to have any more compulsory vaccination. We're going to stop the forced vaccinations. It's optional. They stopped it. And what they did is they introduced a system. Maybe they got it from the Bible. A system of isolation and disinfection. When someone got sick, put them in isolation and you clean things up. Disinfect the place. Clean it up. And what happened? It was successful. Their vaccination rates dropped down to around 10%. 10%. And yet they had much better protection from smallpox than other places did. There was another town nearby that had practically 100% vaccination, and they had 32 times more deaths from smallpox as Leicester did. So these guys are all vaccinated, and yet 32 times, it was like, in Leicester there was like maybe 100 and something people died of smallpox in this huge big epidemic, 140 people. In this other place, it was 3,500 who died. There's a massive amount of difference. But the people say, oh yeah, that's right. No. The pro-vaccination doctors, and do you understand there was money to be made back then? There was money to be made. Who were pro, they were like, it's going to come, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. But it didn't. Leicester had better success against smallpox than other towns. Oh, here it goes. Here. In 1893, there was a smallpox outbreak. The well-vaccinated district of Mould in Flintshire, England, had a death rate 32 times higher. Not only may well-vaccinated towns be affected with smallpox, but the most thorough vaccination of the population that is possible to imagine may be followed by an extensive outbreak of the disease. This happened there. A population under 10 years age, they were practically unvaccinated. And they had a smallpox death rate, it wasn't actually 144, it was 144 per million was what it was. And there wasn't a million people living in Leicester. 144 per million. Whereas mould, which everyone from birth through to 18 years had been vaccinated, and they had 3,600 per million. Let's finish up. We've gone on long enough. The question is, could doctors really be wrong? Because they're the experts. They're the experts. Could they be wrong? Well, doctors have been wrong before. They've been wrong before. Why is it that doctors were called leeches? Why is that? You ever heard that? It's an old term for a doctor, a leech. You need to bring the leech in. If you watch some old movie or whatever. Because they used to use leeches. A leech, it's a little wee creature you stick on, it's going to suck your blood. Why would they do that? Because one of the reasons that you're sick. Why are you sick? You've got bad blood. We need to give you this thing and it's going to suck the blood out of you. Well, they used to bleed people. They used to drain the blood out of them. Isn't that what they did? It was George Washington, I think. One of those people, he got sick and they bled him and he died. It's crazy. But here's the thing. We can look back in history, and people should look back in history. But do you think it happened in history, but now doctors have all got it together? I remember my dad was a nurse, and he went to this conference for nurses, and they had this guy up there. This guy was a cardiologist, and he was talking to them, and he showed them these figures about these two groups of people: the people that they got the standard cardiac care in the hospital, and another group of people who went home. And the people who got the cardiac care in the hospital, much greater success recovery rate. Fantastic. That's what you'd expect. People at home, much more risk of, subsequent coronary events. People thought that's normal. And then he goes, oh, sorry, got the slide round the wrong way. It's the other way round. The people that stayed in the hospital to get the specialised cardiac care, they did much worse than the people who just went home. Nothing's changed. Yeah, there are good. Hey, look, I've got a broken leg, or I need some sort of surgery. Oh, I'm off to the hospital. I'm off to the doctor. But I'm not going to the doctor when I'm not sick. Now, I didn't know about this sort of stuff. My older children, they got vaccinated when they were younger, because I didn't know. My younger children haven't had any vaccinations. We haven't had any since. Okay, you can't go back and change what you've done wrong. But, be aware that these things are coming. Be aware that these things are coming. Understand, it doesn't make any difference to me what you believe about this. You can believe me, you can think I'm just some crazy lunatic. That's your business. But do some research. Find out if what I'm saying is true. That's what Paul said to the Bereans. He said that the Bible says they were more noble than those in Thessalonica, and that they searched the scriptures daily whether those things were so. Looking. If I tell you something in the Bible, look to see if it's right. But I'm telling you these other things, do some research. Find out if it's really true. Let's finish up by turning to Proverbs chapter number 3. Proverbs chapter number 3. It can be a bit depressing when you look and you see people in charge. You know, that's what it was like in the 1800s. The governments were forcing people. The governments were in bed with the doctors and people who were making money. Wow, that's a shock. I couldn't believe that can happen again. Oh no, it has happened. These pharmaceutical companies today, they're making billions and billions of dollars. But do you know, when they get what they're planning, which is forced vaccinations on everybody, not just children, everybody, you must. I mean, don't you think there could come a time when they couldn't say to me, you must have a flu vaccine if you want to work at the university? Would that really be a surprise? It wouldn't be a surprise, would it? You must get this vaccination. You must get this in order. Otherwise, you don't have a job. You know? I mean, it's already been to the stage where they'd come round. Are you vaccinated? No. Pay us now. How's that going to help? Or off to prison. I mean, the thing is, if vaccines were really as great as they say, if they were really as great as they say, wouldn't people be queuing up to get them? If they were really that good, like if they actually provided protection, wouldn't people queue up? Yeah, I'll pay for that. Don't you think they would? Why are they trying to force people? If it's really that good, why are they trying to force people? Because it's not that good. At the end of the day, God's the one we need to trust. Didn't we sang before? Remember we sang Psalm 11, "In the Lord put I my trust." Talked about the same sort of thing in Psalm 91. Trust in God. You know, He's going to keep you from the foul, from the pestilence that walketh at noonday. You're there in Proverbs chapter number 3. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct thy paths." Trust in the Lord. The Bible says it's better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. It's better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in princes. It's better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in doctors. Trust God. Be not wise in thine own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It shall be health to thy navel and marrow to thy bones. That sounds like a good promise. If people had believed God, if people had used, principles of cleanliness. The Bible says you're supposed to go and bury your waste out, don't just leave it there. Turn and bury it. Wash in running water. Put people in isolation when they're sick. These are common sense things. And there's a whole pile of other stuff I could get into. Heaps of other stuff. I mean, do you even know that think about things like measles. Which, look, it's a childhood illness. Sure, if you're malnourished, if you're somewhere where it's unclean, you haven't got clean water, guess what? You could be in trouble. But did you know that people who have measles, that they have a reduced incidence of heart disease? You get measles as a child, you recover, like most people do. Guess what? Reduced incidence of heart disease. Reduced incidence of cancer. Did you know that? Aren't they two of the biggest scourges that are around? Things that people are really dying from in the Western world. Why? Probably because their immune system is functioning better. You see, I believe that God designed our immune system. He actually designed our immune system. And I don't believe that it's broken. I don't believe that we need to fix it. We actually did it wrong, God. Like I say, the design of the eye. It's backwards. We would have done it better. No, it's like they don't know what they're talking about, but it's like, we can improve on things. We can improve on God's design. And it's like, it's not. It's delusion. It's complete delusion. Anyway, we better finish up, or I'll go on and lead them. Let's look to the Lord in prayer. Gracious Lord, we thank you for your word, Lord. We just thank you that your word is true. That your word is true from the beginning. Every one of thy righteous judgments endureth forever. We know that we can trust you. And that when we follow your ways, you'll keep us from pestilence. You'll keep us from all sorts of bad things. Lord, Please keep us from oppressive government. Keep us from people that will force bad things on us and on our children. Lord, I pray that for as long as possible we would have the freedom to preach the gospel. In the same way they'll lock us up for not vaccinating, they'll lock us up for knocking on people's door and preaching gospel to them as well. But Lord, we pray that you would grant us more time, grant us more freedom, so that more people would hear the good news and believe and be saved. Lord, we thank you that you are the great physician. That's by your stripes that we're healed. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for giving your life that we might have life. We thank you and praise you and love you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.